The man who had preached from pulpits and played prophets looked like he was losing his religion. Denzel Washington sat across from Jimmy Fallon in Studio 6B. His usually commanding presence somehow diminished, as if the foundation beneath his legendary confidence had cracked. The actor who had embodied faith on screen for decades now seemed to be grappling with something that shook him to his core. Jimmy noticed it immediately. They'd been playing Spiritual Moments, a Tonight Show game where celebrities shared experiences that had touched their souls or changed their perspectives. For most guests, it was an opportunity to discuss inspiration or gratitude. For Denzel, it had become a window into the darkest period of his spiritual life. "All right, Denzel, here's a beautiful question," Jimmy had said with his usual warmth. "Tell us about a moment when you felt most connected to something bigger than yourself, when your faith felt strongest." The question should have been easy for Denzel. He was known for his deep Christian faith, his speeches about God's plan, his unwavering belief that had guided him through decades of success. Instead, Jimmy watched as one of Hollywood's most spiritually grounded actors began to quietly fall apart. "Jimmy," Denzel said slowly, his voice lacking its usual resonant power, "I need to be honest with you about something, and this might surprise people." The studio fell silent, sensing that whatever was coming would be significant. "I can't answer that question," Denzel continued, "because for the past 2 years, I haven't felt connected to anything. Not to God, not to faith, not to the spiritual foundation I've built my entire life on." The confession hung in the studio air like a thunderbolt. The audience, expecting uplifting talk about divine purpose and blessing, instead found themselves witnessing something much more vulnerable, a man of faith admitting he had lost his way. Jimmy felt his heart sink. "Denzel, what happened?" Denzel looked down at his hands, then back up at Jimmy, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man who had been wrestling with angels and losing. "I lost my faith, Jimmy. Completely and utterly lost it. And when you're Denzel Washington, the guy everyone looks to for spiritual wisdom and strength, admitting that feels like admitting you're a fraud." The cameras continued rolling, but everyone in Studio 6B understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. One of cinema's most inspiring figures revealing his spiritual crisis in real time. Jimmy made a decision that would define this moment. He stood up from his desk and moved to sit directly next to Denzel, understanding that this conversation required presence, not performance. "Tell me about when it started," Jimmy said gently. 2 years ago," Denzel said, his voice heavy with memory. "I was going through some personal struggles, family issues, health scares, just life hitting me from all directions. And I kept praying, kept asking God for guidance, for relief, for some sign that there was purpose in all the pain." He paused, gathering courage for what came next, and I got silence, complete silence, not just no answers, but the feeling that no one was even listening, that I was talking to empty air. Jimmy leaned closer, sensing the depth of pain in Denzel's words. "How did that feel?" "Devastating," Denzel admitted, "because my faith wasn't just my personal belief, it was my identity. I was the guy who gave speeches about God's plan. I was the actor who chose roles that reflected spiritual themes. I was the man who people came to for wisdom and inspiration." His voice cracked slightly. "When that foundation crumbled, I didn't just lose my faith, I lost myself. I didn't know who Denzel Washington was without his connection to God." The audience was completely captivated, many recognizing their own spiritual struggles. In his words, "What did the crisis look like day to day?" Jimmy asked. "I stopped praying," Denzel said simply. "For the first time in 40 years, I stopped talking to God. Not because I was mad, but because I couldn't feel him there anymore. It was like trying to have a conversation with a dial tone." He looked out at the audience, then back at Jimmy. I went through the motions. I still went to church because people expected it. I still gave interviews about faith because that's what Denzel Washington does. But inside, I felt hollow, empty, like I was playing a character I no longer believed in. Jimmy was quiet for a moment, absorbing the weight of what Denzel was sharing. "Did you talk to anyone about this?" "How could I?" Denzel asked, and there was genuine anguish in his voice. "I'm supposed to be the strong one, the wise one, the one who has it all figured out. Admitting I was struggling with doubt felt like letting everyone down." He leaned forward, his voice becoming more intense. "Do you know what it's like to be everyone's spiritual role model when you're questioning everything you've ever believed? To have people quote your old speeches about faith back to you when you're not even sure God exists?" Jimmy felt tears forming in his own eyes. "That sounds incredibly isolating." "It was," Denzel said. "I felt like I was lying to everyone, including myself. And the worst part was the guilt. The voice in my head saying, 'You should be grateful for your blessings. You should have stronger faith. What kind of Christian are you?'" The studio was dead silent, hanging on every word of this unprecedented confession. "What changed?" Jimmy asked softly. "You said this was the past 2 years. Does that mean you're in a different place now?" Denzel was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with how to articulate something complex and ongoing. "I'm rebuilding, slowly, not back to where I was, but forward to somewhere new." "What does that look like?" "It started about 6 months ago," Denzel said, his voice beginning to carry a different energy. Not the old confidence, but something more honest, more earned. "I was at my lowest point, and instead of pretending I was okay, I finally told my wife the truth. I said, 'Pauletta, I think I've lost God.'" He smiled slightly at the memory. "And she said something that changed everything. She said, 'Maybe God didn't go anywhere. Maybe you just grew too big for your old understanding of him.'" Jimmy's expression showed recognition of the wisdom in those words. "That's when I realized I had been holding on to a version of faith that was too small for the questions I was asking," Denzel continued. "I'd been expecting God to work the way I thought he should work, to answer prayers the way I thought they should be answered." His voice grew stronger. "So I started over, not trying to get back to my old faith, but building a new one that could hold doubt and certainty together, one that could include questions without demanding immediate answers." Jimmy leaned forward. "How does that feel different?" "Liberating," Denzel said, and for the first time in the conversation, he smiled genuinely. "Because now my faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to live with mystery. It's about finding God in the questions themselves, not just in the certainties." He addressed the audience directly. "I want to say something to anyone watching who's struggling with doubt, whether it's spiritual doubt or doubt about anything else that used to give your life meaning." His voice carried the authority of hard-won wisdom. Doubt isn't the opposite of faith. Doubt is faith growing. Doubt is your soul expanding beyond its old boundaries. Don't be afraid of the questions. Be afraid of stopping the conversation. The studio erupted in applause, but it wasn't typical celebrity applause. It was the sound of recognition, of people feeling seen in their own spiritual struggles. Jimmy stood up and embraced Denzel, not a show business hug, but a real moment of human connection. When they separated, Jimmy looked directly at his guest. "Denzel, thank you for showing us that even the strongest faith sometimes needs to be rebuilt. That spiritual maturity might actually look like having more questions, not fewer." "Thank you for making it safe to not have all the answers," Denzel replied. 6 months later, Denzel Washington began speaking openly about faith and doubt in his interviews, helping countless people navigate their own spiritual crises. He started a foundation focused on supporting people through major life transitions, understanding firsthand how disorienting it could be when old certainties no longer held. The Tonight Show segment became one of the most viewed and shared pieces of content about faith and doubt ever created. Religious leaders across denominations praised Denzel for normalizing spiritual questioning and showing that doubt could be part of a mature faith journey. Jimmy said in later interviews that the conversation changed how he thought about belief and growth. Denzel taught me that sometimes the bravest thing a person of faith can do is admit when that faith is evolving, even when people are counting on you to stay the same. And Denzel, he continued acting, continued inspiring, continued being a voice of wisdom. But now his wisdom included the humility of uncertainty, the strength found in vulnerability, and the understanding that some questions were more valuable than their answers. His faith had been rebuilt, but it was different now, stronger in some ways, because it could bend without breaking, more honest, because it included space for mystery, more human because it didn't require him to be perfect. Sometimes the most powerful testimony isn't about never wavering. Sometimes it's about finding your way back to hope through the darkness of honest doubt.